When a St. Petersburg Times reporter knocked on the door of Bobby C Thompson, the director of a multi-million-dollar veterans charity, he wasn't expecting extravagant luxury, but he sure wasn't expecting this. You'd think at minimum a charity director would have, a tidy home, a respectable wardrobe. Instead, the reporter found himself in front of a crumbling apartment block in a sketchy part of Tampa, but the reporter couldn't have been prepared for what greeted him. When the door opened and out wafted the unmistakable scent of cheap booze, Bobby, if that was even his real name, looked like he had just gotten up like 5 minutes ago. Oh, and did I mention the roaches? They weren't just here and there. No. They owned the place. The reporter knew something wasn't right, but he had no idea just how wrong things were. Bobby Thompson wasn't a real person. The man he was about to interview was actually a fugitive who had spent decades on the run, and this veterans charity was just his latest con. He had spent the last several years swindling people out of millions of dollars, all under the guise of helping veterans. But how did he manage to evade capture for 28 years, and how did the feds finally get him? How did he get this charity to be so successful? Well, sit back, relax, and enjoy the story on one of the largest charity frauds in history. Alright, so it's 1984 in Sierra Vista, Arizona, and the county just issued an arrest warrant for a lawyer named John Donald Cody. Why? Well, he took $100,000 from his client's accounts. So, they go out to his place to arrest him, but he's nowhere to be found. Even after a few days of searching, all they found was his blue 1977 Corvette, keys still in the ignition, parked at the Phoenix airport. He was gone. Now, missing fugitive, it happens all the time, and most people that skip out of town are quickly caught. But the thing with John is he wasn't your average lawyer. The man had a Harvard education, and after graduating, he worked for military intelligence, most likely as a spy. Great, so the feds trained him on how to stay under the radar. Now, after his intelligence career, he moved down to Arizona to set up his own law practice. He was a defense attorney, and he became quickly known for little quirks he had. We all have our own little quirks. He didn't dress that well. He was a drunkard, his face was slick with gel, and he would always take eye drops. He was also pretty aggressive in the defense cases he took, comparing the local prosecutors to Nazis. So, turns out, John was a step ahead of law enforcement. A little while later, he was seen trying to withdraw around $50,000 from an ATM in Juarez, Mexico. So, he was on the move. With John potentially out of the country, the FBI got involved, slapped him on the wanted fugitives list, and started a nationwide investigation. But every time authorities got close to nabbing him, he would vanish. Years went by and John Cody was still MIA. The authorities had zero leads on his whereabouts. Now, around this time, the 9/11 tragedy happened, and that opened up people's pocketbooks a lot more for veterans charities. I think you know where I'm going with this. All of a sudden, a man named Bobby C Thompson emerges and decides to start his very own charity called the U.S. Navy Veterans Association. Now, think about it. It's really hard to start a charity from scratch. So, how would he get the word out? Well, good old Bobby would use the universally loved method of telemarketers. And you might not know this, but there's whole telemarketing companies designed to market to specific charities over the phone. Now, Bobby hired the most ruthless, shameless telemarketing companies he could find. Ones that got in trouble in the past for impersonating law enforcement. And one thing I want you to understand is the agencies Bobby was hiring were in a whole lower class of telemarketers. These companies are gathering money for good causes, but the scummiest part is that they often take 85 to 90% of all proceeds going in. So if someone finally gives in after being blasted with carefully crafted scripts and manipulation, the majority of the money they think is going to a good cause is just going to the telemarketers' pockets. These are the kinds of companies Bobby is dealing with, and he eventually made a deal with an agency called Community Support Incorporated. They would get 90% of all proceeds while Bobby would get the other 10%. But the thing is, with this charity, 100% of the proceeds weren't going to veterans. So Community Support Incorporated got straight to work. One of their managers did a quick look around on the charity website. It passed the sniff test, and so the company got to work crafting a Navy-approved script to reel in the donations, saying stuff like, now that the script was finished, CSI was ready to blanket entire area codes with a barrage of calls. Now, let's say you were a true supporter of Navy veterans that actually donated to this charity. What would you get? Well, aside from having none of your money go to a legitimate cause, you would get a signed letter from the CEO, Jack Nimitz, saying you were a true American patriot, if only he existed. Bobby had to fabricate an entire executive board for his fake charity. And, the telemarketing company was a little suspicious that they never met anyone in the charity besides Bobby, but, they weren't complaining. They were getting 90%. And the operation was working. The telemarketers generated a nice little $1.3 million for the charity. Now, with a 10% cut, Bobby's not getting too much, but this is just the early days. Soon, Bobby ditched CSI for another company that let him have a higher cut. And by 2007, he was making a nice $1 million a year. Now, he made sure that his life in his crumbling apartment in Tampa was completely separate from his outward persona. He would be balling out on traveling, spending thousands of dollars on hotel rooms. Now, if you run a charity, you gotta be ready for the regulators. Charities can get pretty hairy when it comes to laws, and so Bobby spent some serious money on high-quality lawyers to fend off anyone who would dare question him about his operation. But having counsel wasn't enough. Bobby started using lobbyists to push politicians to his side to build like a little wall of influence to protect him. Over the years leading up to 2009, he started courting top politicians, even shaking hands with President Bush. Remember, this is a guy that's wanted by the FBI. His charity was doing well, having 41 state chapters, 66,000 members, most likely they were fake though, and collecting over $100 million. Bobby, or John, was at the top of the world. But all of that was about to change. Okay, so one day a reporter from the St. Petersburg Times, Jeff Testerman, is writing a story about a random politician that he thinks lied about his military record. So he's doing his research and he notices, this Navy veterans charity is donating to him and has an ad in the paper endorsing him. So Jeff decides to get in contact with them to maybe get a quote for his story or something. He goes to the charity website and he's just clicking around and he sees the board of directors and officers page. Great. So now he can find someone to get in touch with for the story. So he calls the CEO, but it goes to voicemail. He goes down the line calling all the other officers, but they all go to voicemail. He finally makes his way to Bobby, and finally Bobby picks up. But when Jeff asked him about the donation, Bobby said that he never made any such donation. Now at this point, Jeff is just excited. He thinks he's onto something because if the politician is lying about his campaign contributions, that could be huge. To get more of a quote for the story, Jeff decides to meet Bobby in person. And he looks up the address to the office and, well, what do you know? He's just a couple minutes away from the newspaper office. He could just swing by there, get the quote, and be done. But as he's pulling up to the crib, things just seem off. This supposed charity director's house is a falling apart duplex in a bad side of town. And when he meets Bobby face to face, the nice scent of alcohol just wafts over him. Bobby had been drinking again. Now imagine you're a half-drunk Bobby and you see a reporter just randomly walk up to your address. Alarm bells would be going off. Who knows, could Jeff be onto him? Was something leaked about his charity? So when Jeff asks him about the campaign contribution, Bobby just flips out, saying that his charity never made any contribution to any campaign ever. And Jeff's probably like, whoa, chill out, man. Bobby then just shrinks back saying he's a white guy living in a poor district and he donated out of his own personal funds. Jeff at this point is a little confused. He expected to be welcomed. He's telling this charity director that a guy he's donating to is a fraud. Why wouldn't the director be happy about that? So Jeff decides to ask about Bobby's background. Bobby said he's part Choctaw and any personal information check would lead to 4 separate identities because his information is corrupted. Bro is not media trained. And with such an odd response, Jeff is intrigued. Something seems off about this Bobby Thompson and his charity. So as he's driving back, he decides he's gonna dig deeper. So when he gets back to the office, he talks to his colleague John Martin about what happened and his curiosity is piqued. Fortunately for Jeff, John is a little whiz with the computers, and so he got to work. But he soon runs into a problem. He pulls up some Tampa area records, but as he goes back in time, there's no trace of him. So he goes back to the charity website, and scrolling through the pages, he keeps getting the impression that the site is kind of haphazardly thrown together. It looks pretty amateurish for an established multi-million-dollar organization. John then turns to all the listed state chapters and their officers, but none of them exist. While this was going on, Jeff was dialing numbers he tried earlier constantly, but none of the supposed executive team would return his calls. Finally, Jeff got some of his DC colleagues to go to the offices of this charity, and guess what they found? A rented mailbox in a UPS store. Not a good look. But as this was going on, Bobby was on the move. He quietly slipped away from his crumbling Tampa duplex and vanished. After over a 6-month investigation, the newspaper published their findings. There was a huge amount of evidence, but it still left unanswered questions as to who Bobby even was, or where he was. The state capitals were starting to take notice. And then the lawsuits came. At this point, multiple states were starting investigations, and Bobby's charity was starting to slip. Now, Bobby was baffling to investigators. He didn't have any close friends, no places he mentioned vacationing in, no hobbies, nothing. He was just a generic, indistinctive person. All they had to work with was just 3 fake identities, including Bobby Thompson, Ronnie Britton, and Elmer Dozier. And as 2011 rolled around, the investigators were getting desperate, and they were starting to face the real possibility that Bobby might be gone for good, maybe even dead. They may never find him. But one day, as they're combing through different records related to the identities, they find something. A bank account had been opened in Boston under the name of Ronnie Britton. Now, this is curious because the real Ronnie Britton lived in Gallup, New Mexico. The bank account led to a P.O. box at a UPS store that hadn't been paid in a while, but luckily the UPS store still held on to the mail. This was huge because they could find a clue as to where Bobby was. And as the agents are sorting through the piles, they find something interesting. There was a rewards flyer from Staples that had credit earned from a past purchase. The purchase was made in Providence, Rhode Island, so authorities quickly found where he stayed and raced over there, but the landlord said he already left. So the authorities left without Bobby, but they were a lot more confident in finding him. They found prepaid debit cards from him, and, you can track those transactions. Now, this honestly confused investigators because they were thinking, how could someone so good at hiding their tracks make such a stupid mistake? They tracked those transactions, and they led straight to Portland, Oregon. And looking even closer, they were all around the same intersection. So they fly out, go to that intersection, and stake out the street corner, paying attention to everyone that passes. They wait and wait, but there's no sign of him. So the agents decide to do something risky. He walks into a gas station, goes up to the store clerk, shows him a picture of Bobby, and asks if he's seen him. Now this could backfire because then the agent's cover could be blown. But the store clerk is like, oh yeah, I saw him yesterday. This was huge. So Bobby was still here. And so the agents went to all the places he frequented, aka a bar. As the agent walks up, he looks to his left, and there's Bobby Thompson. After following him for a little longer, they slap the cuffs on him and take him into custody. Now, the trial was a whole ordeal because Bobby wouldn't give his real name. But, the thing is, it's not like you're going to avoid prosecution by not giving your name. And it wouldn't be long before authorities actually found him to be John Donald Cody. After a lengthy trial, John Cody would be convicted on theft, money laundering, using fake identities, and fraud. And he would get 28 years in prison, which is, for him, essentially a life sentence. Which, honestly, I think is appropriate because he played off of the kindness of thousands of people to enrich himself. But yeah, that's all I got.